Hello, my name is Jennifer Hernandez, and this is my PowerPoint on drugs and crime, the impact of drugs in Portugal. So let's start off with the impact. The epiphany that Portugal had that altered their government and therefore society was that they discovered that there wasn't actually a drug issue, but a human mentality issue, which is a realization the US hasn't yet taken a grasp on, which is a topic that we have discussed a lot in class. Portugal's revelation of drugs led them to being the first country to decriminalize the small possession of drugs and possibly winning the war on drugs that everyone around the world has been fighting. So, the history of drugs in Portugal. This is a timeline based off of the 20 years of policies in Portugal in which affected drugs and drug usage. In 1970, they were influenced by the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961. In 1976, drug use was understood as a complex medical psychological problem. So, since the 70s, they've been knowing that this isn't a criminal issue, but a psychological issue. And in 1983, they ratified the Convention on Psychotropic Substances. And in 1993, they ratified the UN Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. And in 1999, the Portuguese National Drug Strategy was initiated. And then finally in 2000, decriminalized the public and private use, acquisition, and possession of illegal drugs for personal use. So, how was Portugal before the decriminalization of drugs? During the 1990s, Portugal was devastated by a problem that they had with drugs spreading in their country, since 1 in every 100 people were addicted to heroin. And in addition to that, there was a concerningly increasing rate of HIV infection across the Portuguese people, which was an effect of the drug problem. It was so high to the point where it became the highest in the European Union, the number of HIV infections. So this would be my personal action plan to combat the drug issue in Portugal if I were in charge of it. So if I were looking at this through the lens of an official in Portugal during the 1990s, I would have suggested a higher regulation of drugs, but to provide the proper medication and treatment for the addicts and people who suffered from HIV and AIDS in prison, since the world at the time, and even now, we are so obsessed with the war on drugs. But Portugal had a different route to deal with the problem than what I had, obviously. So, why was decriminalization decided on? Since Portugal not only had a drug problem, but an HIV problem connected with the drugs, they thought that decriminalizing it would allow people to not be afraid to get the help that they needed, and to get better from their addiction with the additional expansion of their treatment services, as well as harm reduction with access to sterile equipment such as syringes, the ability to go to methadone maintenance therapy, and other treatments that could help them to get better from their addictions, without also fearing getting arrested. So this is a quote from the architect of the decriminalization policy, and he basically said, "It's very difficult to identify a causal link between decriminalization by itself and the positive tendencies we've seen. It's a total package. The biggest effect has been to allow the stigma of drug addiction to fall, to let people speak freely, and to pursue professional help without fear." So I feel like this quote really encapsulates how Portugal thinks when it comes to drugs, where it's not a criminal issue and people need help and the stigma should fall so people could actually get help for the problems that they have. So the negative effects of drug in Portugal before and after, so we could see how the decriminalization actually affected Portugal. So before the decriminalization of drugs, deaths caused by drugs in 1999 were at 369 deaths. This is where they actually started struggling with drugs and saw it as like a threat. But because before they did have a drug problem, but it wasn't to this extent. And other than the deaths before the decriminalization of drugs, there were also an HIV and AIDS epidemic transmitted throughout the Portuguese people who abused drugs. So then after the decriminalization of drugs, although the death rate did drop very fast in the beginning in 2001 to 152 deaths, which is a lot less compared to the over 300 people in the 1999 one, It did start to rise up again in 2000 with 280 deaths. And other than deaths after the decriminalization of drugs, the prevalence of drugs within minors also grew between the years of 2001 to 2007. So, how has Portugal been affected by the decriminalization of drugs? So, this is a chart that shows off the statistics of then and now Portugal drug decriminalization, and it goes over the overdose death rate, the new HIV diagnosis due to injecting rate, and the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses. Which, I don't know, but in my head, I thought that decriminalizing it would make the incarcerated for drug offenses go to zero, but I was clearly wrong. So, you learn a new thing every day. Overdose deaths went down drastically from 369 to 30 in 1990 to 2016 alone, and HIV diagnosis due to injecting went down also drastically from 907 in 2000 to 2017, only 18 people. And obviously, the incarcerated one went down as well. So, what are the effects of decriminalization of drugs in Portugal? This map shows the statistics of drug overdose rates across Europe, and you can see that Portugal is among the lowest rates even though they decriminalize drugs. So in this chart, it goes over drug overdose death rate, and you can see that the lighter the color, the lower the death rate is, and Portugal is one of the lightest colors. Well, it is the lightest color among a lot of other countries like Italy, but it is a lot less compared to like Russia and Europe. Not Europe, to Britain, Great Britain, yeah. So these are the statistics of before and after the decriminalization law compared to other countries in Europe. So as you can see, in 2000 there was definitely a spike, but that would have been obvious since they had just decriminalized laws. They had just decriminalized drugs, but it wasn't to the same extent as the rest of Europe, which is the blue, and Portugal is the red. And in 2015, there was another spike, but you can see that from 2005 to 2010, it went down drastically. So, yeah. So, how did Portugal benefit from the decriminalization of drugs? The decriminalization of drugs in Portugal led to a decrease of seizures caused by various drugs, such as heroin, cocaine, a decreased number of drug-related crimes and deaths caused by drugs. And over time, the amount of people who went to therapy for drug addiction fell as time went on due to the consumption of drugs declining, as well as the number of drug addicts who had HIV fell as well as a result to the decriminalization law due to access of sterile syringes. So overall, very good stuff. But there is an issue. Is decriminalization as good as it seems? Because as far as I've been talking about it, it seems to be really good. But let's see if everything is as it seems. Heightening their successes by hiding their faults. Overviewing their statistics, they seem to be overall successful with diminishing the drug problem, but when you look closer, you can see the cracks and faults within the age groups. So, the contradictory evidence. Even though Portugal does have one of the lowest death rates caused by drugs in Europe, this doesn't mean that there isn't still a drug issue in Portugal. There are still high prevalence rates of drugs usage in Portugal. So, according to statistics collected by the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, aka the EMCDDA, they have revealed that between the time that the decriminalization law was enacted to 2007, the lifetime prevalence rates for various drugs such as cannabis, cocaine, amphetamines, ecstasy, and LSD have risen from the main population of Portuguese people, which include the ages of 15 to 54, which is the main category. So, to conclude, the decriminalization of drugs didn't overall completely help the drug issue entirely, since there is still popularity with them in the prominent age groups, but at least the Portuguese people who are drug abusers are able to get the help that they need and don't fear asking for help towards their addiction due to the fear of being incarcerated. Another positive as well is that the HIV and AIDS epidemic prominent in drug abusers has depleted and is almost non-existent. And deaths caused by overdose or other drug-related deaths have fallen drastically. Even though the drug war hasn't been won yet, looking at Portugal and their decriminalization laws may let us see a light at the end of the tunnel that influences a win in the drug war by seeing them taking small baby steps. So that is the end of my PowerPoint. These are my cited sources, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and bye!